Okay, hello everyone. Hello everyone. Welcome, welcome. So our opening program features artist Cathy Busby, whose new book, I Wonder, Art plus Care plus Dementia, Art Metropole 2025, reflects on her personal and artistic relationship with her late husband, Gary Neil Kennedy. The book traces the role of art during Gary's dementia decline, looking at the practices that he returned to later in life, the projects that carried them through in his long-term care, and the wall painting, I Wonder, first begun in Gary's room at Parkview and later fully realized at Art Metropole. And like many students who studied at NASCAD, I was deeply influenced by the conceptual art movement and by Gary and the work that came out of that era. I think about Lawrence Weiner's CJCH TV interview, just for instance. I've always liked that piece where it's showing him interacting with his students in a way that sort of humanized the conceptual art movement instead of sort of mythologizing it or historicizing it. And so I often think of that when looking at Gary's legacy. In archival photos, he's always smiling. Any photos of him at NASCAD, he always has a smile. And I think Cathy's book expands that picture with even more personal glimpses, like photos of him in St. Catharines in the beginning of the book. And I know that many of us can relate in some way to Cathy's story of caring for someone with dementia, though it's never something I would wish on anyone. And when my own grandfather's dementia progressed and he began to forget the names of his grandchildren, and he would sometimes disappear in the middle of the night, which can be scary, but somehow would still whoop the whole family in a game of cribbage. And I've been especially fond of works like Remembering Names piece, where Gary set out to attempt to remember the names of all the people he had ever known. In the same line, his 72 lithograph, My Fourth Grade Class Picture, in which he inscribed the names of his classmates onto the photo. And I think these works, just like Cathy's book, reveal how memory and care and creativity can intertwine. And before Cathy begins here, one phrase out of the book that I really liked, that just spoke to me. I just wanted to read from the book. Gary and I would go for walks together through our neighborhood and enjoy the simple pleasure of holding hands, retracing the same 10 or 12 blocks season after season. We'd comment on the changing flowers and foliage. No two walks were the same. And so please join me in welcoming Cathy Busby.
Thank you so much, Andrew, especially for your quote from the book. And thank you to all of you for coming today. I'd like to remark on us being in a church, not a deconsecrated church, an active church, and it's an Andrew Cobb building. And I was just informed that the longtime home of Gary and his first wife Jane and their children was an Andrew Cobb building home. So, nice coincidence. So, I thought I wanted all of you who wanted to hold the book during this presentation to have that opportunity. If you don't have one in your hands and you would still like one, Andrew at the front here has the box beside him and can provide you with one. So, I feel like the physicality of this book is important. I feel like, for me, it contains my containment of this experience. And I feel like from the beginning, Gary wanted to be out as someone who had dementia. In fact, when we met up with people in the early days of his illness, and people said, "Oh, how are you, Gary?" He'd say, "Fine." And I have, Cathy, what is it I have? Gary, you have dementia. I have dementia. And I really felt like that was, he knew what it meant. He was, and I really appreciated that he was out about it. And that also helped me to feel that making this book was in keeping with his wishes, though we didn't talk about a book because it didn't come up. It was a whirlwind of an experience, as many of you will know from going through the dementia experience with a loved one. So I thought I'd start by talking about why it's called I Wonder. And so Gary used to say, initially in a kind of sing-songy way, not when he was ill, just in a sort of, I don't know, sort of space-filling in a nice kind of way. He'd say, oh, I wonder, wonder. Oh, I wonder, wonder. Who wrote the book of love? Oh, I wonder. Just like that. And then when he became ill, he would occasionally say, oh, I wonder. And I just, even at the time, as I say, in the whirlwind of caring for someone with dementia, it struck me as kind of wonderful that he was wondering. Whether he was wondering or not, he was saying he was wondering. And so when he was deep into dementia, I wanted to reclaim that wonder for him and for me. And so in his last care facility, I asked for permission to paint the bathroom, which was a very big bathroom. It had room for lifts and big wheelchairs, and its walls were quite bashed up when he moved in. And I thought it was it needed a little TLC anyway, this bathroom did. And so I asked the charge nurse if I could paint the bathroom for Gary, and she said, well, she'd never been asked before if, so anyway. I said, well, if you could look into it, that would be great. And it took 6 weeks. It went through the whole facility management. It actually, it was a Providence Healthcare a building, so there are a number of buildings and facilities in Vancouver under that umbrella. It went to the head of facilities of all the facilities to get permission to paint the bathroom. I didn't actually ask if I could paint words in the bathroom. I just asked if I could paint the bathroom. So I was delighted when the word came back, and she was very pleased to tell me, I got permission. So right away, I started patching the holes. There were not holes, but the dents in the wall. You can imagine. There's a picture, actually. You can see pictures in the section in the middle of the book-ish, and it's called I Wonder. It has a section break page that says I Wonder. It's yellow. And so you can see how I was busily patching up the wall. And then I painted, and I painted it the color of our condo, a white that was that particular white. I was doing all I could to have Gary feel at home in the institution. And then I started taping I Wonder. Well, I did the drawing not very well. I couldn't draw these wall text painting plans the way Gary could, but I did my best. And then I was working on the taping, and when I got to the D, I was working on the D on a Saturday, and we'd had a nice day, and in fact, a friend came over who had previously been bringing pizza every 2 weeks, homemade pizza, and but at this point, Gary couldn't chew very well, and so I said, well, it'd be great if you come, Laura, but you have to bring something softer. And so she said, oh, well, how about like fusilli and pesto, homemade? I said, well, I think that'd be great. So she brought it over, and she brought placemats, which she always did, and then we wheeled his, the wheelie tray out to where there was a couch. So we made it kind of cafe-ish. And we put a little tablecloth on, and she'd brought fabric napkins. And we had this lovely pasta. And Gary had a few bites. He was quite weak and hardly had any words. But Laura, determined to have Gary communicate, said, "So, Gary, how did you like that?" And he paused, long pause, eyes closed, and he says, "Damn good." And so I thought that was great, and that was the day before he passed away. And Gary being such a foodie, I thought, isn't that lovely that he would have this lovely homemade pasta with pesto, homemade pesto, so close to the end of his life. And another act of kindness and sort of that idea of it takes a village came from making friends. I spent a lot of time in the facilities that Gary was in, and did my best to have good relations with the people who work there. And there was a particular nurse. I rode my bike all the time to get to the facility. And there was a particular nurse who always rode his bike. And he brought his bike upstairs into the facility, and he sort of put it on the patio, and I admired his bike, and we talked bikes a little bit, and the best route to get to this Parkview facility, and so we were kind of palsy. And anyway, he was on that night, and he'd been looking in on Gary, and he knew he was weakening, and in the morning, he sort of saw Gary through his breakfast, and then Gary was very weak. He just didn't have any energy. So Michael, the nurse, suggested that he maybe would like to go back to bed and just have a little lie down, which Gary never did, but anyway, he did. And then Michael came in and thought he might perk Gary up a little by offering a shave. Gary always liked to be clean shaven. And Michael got the kit and gave Gary a shave, and Gary seemed to have sort of perked up a little bit. And so they had called me and said, you should probably come in. He's really rapidly weakening. And Michael left the room, and when he returned about 5 minutes later, Gary had passed away. So Gary passed away, a clean-shaven, well-fed man, and thanks to the care of others, including me, but the care of others. And so I'm very grateful, and I also have a sense of wonder about all of that as well, the sort of wonderful things that happened along the way. And also that I was working on the D in the I Wonder painting. So if you looked at the tape at that time, sort of hard to tell in these photos, but it said I won. And Gary was, as many of you will know, had a competitive streak. So it was kind of lovely that it said I won. But anyway, I wanted to make the work and to complete the work. So again, another wondrous thing was I called my friend, a documentary photographer person, Rachel Topham, who was in Victoria at the time, and I said, and we're in Vancouver, and I said, Gary's passed away, and I would really like to have a photo of the walls to where I got them done to. So that's what you see. She made a panorama photo of the painting, and then based on, or the non-painting of the taping, And then this is a detail. The cover is a detail of that work. And so she came in, she left Victoria to come immediately because I had to move out of the facility. The pressure on care facilities, as I'm sure you all know, is intense. And they had asked if I could leave, get everything out within 24 hours, which normally is a very reasonable thing to ask. But when you want professional photographs taken of your bathroom walls, it's a bit of it's a bit of a stretch. And actually, they said to me, don't worry, we understand. They didn't understand that I would, these pictures of these walls, but they understood that it was important to me. And so, so they were like, you take the time it requires. And so I did. And thanks to that, I was able to apply the first thing I did was use that information from those photos to kind of hold as this, when you have an idea, and like I'd had this idea about wonder, and I wonder, and then my realization of it was in process. But it helped me a lot to have that, especially once she made the panoramic photograph, and it was like, I really want to complete this. And for people who were at the Toronto memorial, there was a folder that went along with that memorial where the panorama of that image was in it, as well as the Lawrence Weiner photograph of Gary with the corner cut off the side of it. So where do I want to go from here? Oh yeah, so the next thing that I want to point out in the book is the next section, which is about I Wonder at Art Metropole. And lucky again, or I wonder again, was that Art Metropole was moving into a new storefront space from their place at the the Museum of Contemporary Art, where they'd had sort of like a shop, but they were moving back to a storefront location, and they were renovating, and Jonathan Middleton was the person in charge, and Jonathan, he was the director, and Jonathan had been one of my care helpers. Like I had had people stay in the building where we lived, and to help at night when Gary was very anxious, and it was hard for me to help him alone, and so I had people stay, and so Jonathan was our first, he called himself the first artist in residence to help out at night. But also he was the director of Art Metropole. Also they were moving into a new space. And I said, hey, I'd like to paint this painting in the new space. And he said, how big? Like, about like this? And I said, well, no, actually, I was thinking like I wanted to fill the whole wall here. It's about 35 feet long and about 10 feet high. And anyway, so he said, oh, well, I'll get back to you on that. And the next day, he got back and said, yeah, you can do that. So you will see in that section, I was working, and again, another wonderful thing that happened was that I contacted Gary's painters in Toronto, Mark Bell and Eric Glavin, and they both said, yes, we would love to help you with this, which I definitely needed help with. I'd never painted like a really big painting like without Gary. I had done them with Gary, for Gary, like helping him out, but like my drawing was not great. So anyway, they came and they worked with my drawing, just kind of gussied it up, and we did the painting. And so you can, as you turn the pages in that I Wonder section, you can see the finished painting. And I also wanted to note the detail picture that you see in that section. And some of you will recognize that work. it's untitled. It's from 1975. It's so it's so there's the detail picture, and then on the next page there's the full picture of it. It's white on white. It's actually gesso on watercolor paper, Arches watercolor paper, and it was not under UV protective glass. It was under just 1970s framed in an aluminum frame, kind of regular old glass. And so the paper faded over time, but the gesso stayed white. And I really liked that idea of this drawing of Gary's, of these floating shapes, which were based on corrections to the paper. So he was looking at the paper, found the imperfections, like little flecks in the paper, marked some of them, and then made these shapes. He did a series of paintings along these lines. But the one you're seeing the detail of and the one that you see the whole painting of, were the ones that were like framed and in our life and had been in his family home with Jane and the children in previous times. It was actually up in their home in Florida for some years, the two of them, the two images. Anyway, I loved the idea that the gesso stayed white and the paper faded, and it made the painting more pronounced over time. I was just thinking that was so lovely in terms of aging and becoming more pronounced over time. And so that was how I came to determine the color palette for the painting. And it happened, the sort of beige color happened to be called Divine White, which I kind of like too. So that's where that came from. Now, I'd like to talk about, I think I'm going to do a little explanation and reading now from the last drawings that Gary did. You'll find, I feel like saying, and now we'll turn to page and sing him. Anyway, but no, we're turning to 18 drawings, and there you will find a drawing that looks like this, and as you turn those pages, you will find several other drawings, and that comes from also this larger book called 18 Drawings that has all of those drawings in it. And one of the things that I think's really nice about this book, again, one of these lovely, takes a village and people really caring to make this happen, is that the book was initially printed with scanned, there was a proof, and the images had been scanned, but only on the one side, the drawing. But the way Gary did the drawings was that he said he was emptying the pen. And that meant that sometimes the drawings went through the paper because they were done on printer paper, just regular paper. And so what we had to do was also scan the back of the drawings. So the pages now have, the finished book has both the front side of the drawing and the back side of the drawing, which is also a scan. And that was a kind of a way of like honoring Gary's intention, that he was emptying the pen. So if it went through the paper, that was part of the drawing. So Gary couldn't talk at this point. I mean, occasionally he could come out with a few words, but he didn't have much language. And so I'm going to, because I wanted to, I was asked by Kagan McFadden, who said, let's make a book. And then he said, we need some kind of, there should be some kind of a text. And at the time, I was deep in the whirlwind of like, I'm not making art here, I'm just getting through the days and getting to medical appointments and sorting through the meds and should he be institutionalized? Do I have to do that, or can we keep him at home, and who can stay overnight, and all that kind of stuff, that whirlwind of stuff. So I didn't know. I didn't know about, like, writing something. But anyway, I thought, well, okay. Kagan asked me, what could I possibly do? So Gary happened to sit down on our couch, where he sat a lot, and I sat down beside him with my laptop, and I tried to channel what he might be thinking as he did this drawing. So this is on the first page. It's in italics in the book, if you want to follow along. Maybe you just want to close your eyes and listen. I took pen to paper and let a line start coming. I drew around and around and around until I was done. I hadn't drawn for a while, and it felt good. Over a few days, maybe 3 or 4 sittings, I did the same thing, letting the repetition happen. I liked the black ink on white paper. I've always liked black and white. There was nothing fancy about the materials, office pens and printer paper. I've often chosen to work with materials right at hand. Thinking about this, I'm going to draw now. I can hear the sound of the pen with its rhythmic whir around and around and around. The accumulation of lines makes for more and more fill. I go faster, and the strokes are shorter, then slower, and they're longer. I press a bit harder and keep going and going. I'm filling, and it's getting blacker and blacker. I don't lift the pen. And this is the drawing that he's making, the one that you see on the facing page. The minutes go by. I keep going. I just back and forth now, filling, blackening, faster and faster, filling and filling. We're quiet, Cathy writes. I keep my hand with the pen in it moving. Now with all my energy and focus, one area denser and denser, penetrating the paper. I get a lot out of a pen. I stop for a few seconds to have a look, but it's not done. I keep emptying the pen onto the paper with my marks, back and forth, not lifting the pen. Back to it again, short back and forth lines. I stop. Cathy reads this to me. I go back to drawing, now back and forth, back and forth. I keep going. Maybe it's been 10 or 15 minutes now. We're sitting close to each other on the couch, the white couch, where I sit quite a bit of the time now. Some more circular motion interspersed with back and forths. 2 different sounds of pen on paper surface with a book underneath. There are a few clusters of back and forth round or oval drawings now. It's done. We look at it together. I drop it to the floor and look at the next blank white page in front of me. So I was just trying to give words to what I felt he was doing. I think I'll just say a little bit about the Remembering Names work. So Gary, this begins, it's the first of the little subsection in the middle. There's a red iron oxide. Oh, by the way, the red iron oxide is the first color that Gary used after a long period of just using black and white. And he introduced it, I believe it's 1970, 71. And it was red iron Liquitex paint. And he had it, it was at the Lethbridge, Southern Alberta Art Gallery in Lethbridge. And he hired a painter to paint the walls, except for a little, about half an inch on either side of where the direction of the wall changed. And yes, and that, Alan, that's the piece you brought me the folder from just now. Yeah, miraculously, which I already put away. So anyway, that was the first time that, I think I've got that right. And the reason he used red iron oxide was because it was the most frequently used little seen paint color, and that's because it was the primer for steel, non-stainless steel, so ships and cars when they used to be non-stainless steel. They were primed with that undercoat of red iron oxide and then painted over top. So it was this invisible color. Gary liked that idea. And then he introduced the yellow iron oxide not too long after that. Okay, so what I wanted to say in that remembering names section is, so Gary had remembered names in the 70s, is when he first did. I believe it's when he went to California Institute of the Arts and met a lot of people and was trying to remember. And so he remembered their names. And so he wrote them down as an artwork and a long column. And then did that several other times over the years, in the 90s. And then he said one day to our friend David McWilliam, who some of you might know, was an early MFA student at NASCAD and longtime dean at Emily Carr University and in Vancouver. And he was our friend. And so he came by, and Gary said, I need a show. Kind of like I need a fix. I need a show. And David said, oh, well, maybe we could do something with CSA Gallery, which was a nearby artist-run center above Pulp Fiction, for those of you who know the Mount Pleasant area near Main and Broadway, and which was like a few blocks from our house. So anyway, that came about, and Gary, Gary he wouldn't have been able to find his way there and back reliably. And so we just set it up with a bunch of people to accompany him. Like every time, someone would accompany Gary to go to the gallery to write the names of everyone, the names of people he could remember from over his lifetime. And so for 2 weeks, he did that. He went pretty much every day, and somebody would be with him. Dorit Sippis came up from LA to be with him for a few days, and she accompanied him, as well as many local people. And so anyway, so if you turn the pages in that section, you can see the way he made a kind of river of names. And so that was Gary's last show, and his last solo show. It also included a photo of his grade 11 basketball team from St. Catharines, where he'd grown up. And he wrote the names of all those players except one who he couldn't remember on that photograph for the occasion of this show. And then David, that red hat, which is not to be confused with a MAGA hat, it says St. Catherine Saints. And that was the name of the basketball team that had won the championships that Gary was on in grade 11. And so David McWilliam one day brought that in. He'd had it made, and Gary sort of didn't take it off for 4 or 5 months. So, yeah. How we doing? How's the energy? Shall I can talk for quite a while. I mean, maybe I'll tell a couple more stories, talk about a couple more things. I don't want to exhaust you, and I want room for people to be able to comment or ask questions. Okay, I think maybe I'm going to read a little bit from the experience. Some of you may know well what it's like to go through someone with dementia, but I'm going to read about the last time that we traveled. The last time we traveled this is on page 33. for those of you who want to follow along. And on the page beside it, you will see me keeping track of my sleep because I'm just so tired that it was like I felt like I was kind of climbing a sheer cliff sometimes. And I was looking for my holds, and one of the holds was like, oh, sleep. Okay, I can keep going, you know? It was kind of like that. And I when I went through, I went through all kinds of material to try and find the images and the suitable visuals for this book. And I wanted to include this partly because when you see that blue page under Saturday, November 21st, my dad had died 26 years ago, but anyway, bed at 12, but Gary got up and then walked with me in circles and around the condo, opening the front door a couple of times. Eventually went to the toilet and then getting back to the couch fell hard as I tried to roll up his PJ bottoms, which he was tripping over. That was the kind of... Gary fell quite a lot, and sometimes he could get right up again, and sometimes it was, a bad fall, and I had to decide if we needed medical attention. But I was really trying to keep him out of a wheelchair, because then you lose mobility, and then you lose facility or capacity really quickly. Anyway, about traveling. The last time we traveled together was to the MacKelvie Art Gallery in Regina, where Gary had an exhibition in late fall 2018. I'd asked my sister to join us for support. Gary was disoriented at the hotel, the DoubleTree, unable to grasp why we were there. I had tried to keep an ear open for him during the night, but when I woke up early in the morning, he wasn't there. I called the hotel front desk, and the receptionist told me that he had wandered down to the lobby in the night, headed for the front door in pajamas and bare feet. It had been bitterly cold that night, minus 22 Celsius. The hotel receptionist had brought him back inside just before he stepped through the doors to the outside. They took him in a different room and checked in on him regularly throughout the remainder of the night so as not to disturb me. Apparently, this kind of wandering was not uncommon among guests, and the hotel had this protocol in place. They knew I would be looking for him in the morning. The actions of the hotel were one of those unexpected instances of dementia recognition and response that was so welcome in our lives. It was a relief to know that Gary had been looked after, and I was so grateful that my sister was there to debrief with afterwards. So, yeah, and that was the last time we traveled. Gary was, it was an experiment to go to this event, and but he didn't know why we were there, and he just, I took him to the gallery. He recognized his work. It was the Yaomi work. Big, large paintings, Yaomi, the cry of desperation of Omar Khadr when he was being detained and interrogated in Abu Ghraib. And so these big kind of memorial paintings, they were like, they were 9 feet by 7 feet, and there were 13 of them to spell out. And so it was very room-filling. And he was supposed to speak about the work. So anyway, I just explained, and Gary came and stood with me, and I talked about the work. But yeah, that was definitely pushing the limits of how far we could go with his condition and wanting to keep up his professional practice. So, but it was good. It was all. I'm really glad that that we did that. I'll just explain a little bit about the structure of the book. I wanted to, of course, introduce Gary, introduce at the beginning that this is the shape of this person who came to have this illness. And then I wanted to give a little bit of a picture of myself as this person who came to be the primary caregiver for this person. And so it was like the coming together of his world, his life, his experiences, and my world, life, experiences, and how they intermingled to get through this time. And so one of the things that had really been helpful to us and yet sort of rubbed the wrong way sometimes was the branding that the Alzheimer's Society had, which was about shaping the journey, living with dementia. And I used to nickname it, it was not shaping the journey, it was managing the nightmare. But I didn't put it into print. I almost did. And then others, my readers, said, no, don't do that. So I think they were right. But I can still say it out loud sometimes. And I actually am grateful to, I'm in talking about us approaching the, going through the dementia. One of the really helpful things towards the beginning, Gary was diagnosed in 2016, but he had been showing symptoms since 2012. He'd had a double surgery unintentionally, like the first surgery was planned and the second was an emergency 3 months later. And after that, his cognition was not the same. And then he was okay, but he wasn't 100%. And then in 2016, he was officially diagnosed. And I went to see the Alzheimer's people who very fortunately, it's the Alzheimer's Society of BC, as there is also one in Nova Scotia. And they were like a block away from where we lived. And and then Gary and I went together. And Gary said, he didn't believe he had dementia. And I said, well, we have to go and talk to these people. And didn't take him long to come around. As I've already explained, he would introduce himself that way. But at the very beginning, actually maybe even before we had the diagnosis, but it was clear if you knew what you were looking at. And so, so he said, so how long do I have, to the woman? And being very Gary, taking charge. And she said, well, Gary, between 5 and 8 years from the beginning of onset is usual. And then he said, well, what's going to happen to me? And she said, well, Gary, it's your brain that's deteriorating, that's declining, and your brain controls everything. So everything that you do. And so she was like, so just imagine. And she was just trying to help him and me to take in what we could. It was very hard. I think it was more hard-hitting for me at the time than it was for Gary. I had not been through, I had a good friend who had dementia, but I didn't live with her. And and everybody's experience is different. That's why I introduced Gary as someone who was a sports person as a young person, not only because he had a lot of conchs on his head when he was a football player in the 50s and early 60s, but also other kinds of athletic capacities that he had. Like he liked to run, and he could run like an 18-year-old when he was 84, when he was anxious, and so that was a difficult thing. Anyway, so I introduce us, and then sort of flipping through. I wanted to provide a little bit of insight into what it was going through this, and one of why I printed the business cards for the case managers is because, this was Amelia's. She was the occupational therapist and doing case management, but then you can see there it says Scott, then Helen, then Chris. This was the person who was supposed to be a steady, they were going to carry us through the system. And I kept, we went through more than, probably 6 case managers. And every time you had to update them on everything. They had to see the whole file. It was a lot of work. And so I really felt, ultimately, I had to be the case manager. I mean, they signed the papers, and they made the actual moves, like getting into long-term care. Well, Gary made those moves. He got himself into long-term care. But so there's that story. I also wanted to acknowledge the community hub of the Federal Cafe that was our corner cafe where we're having a launch next month. And because Gary went there every day, and they loved him. And when COVID happened, the barista became a caregiver for us. They had to close the cafe, and I said, "Can I hire you to accompany Gary?" And so Chris became one of our assistants. And and then I go into the part of the book of the sort of creative interventions that we made. And then at the end of the book, there's an essay by a local geriatrician, some of you may know or may know of, Dr. Melissa Andrew, who's a family friend and a renowned geriatrician and memory expert, dementia, Alzheimer's expert, and a long time, over a dozen years of being on the Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia board. So she writes an essay about how, keeping the carpets and other reflections, person-centered, art-informed care and dignity of risk. It's about, I wouldn't get rid of the carpets in our house. I mean, it's not just about that, but that's what that reference is about. And then Mandy Jinson, the last essay, is giving some art context to the book and to what we did. And so she is a former Vancouver Art Gallery curator. She's from New Brunswick and is actually back in New Brunswick now. And so she writes about Gary's work, coming across Gary's work as a young person, and about making sense of Gary's work and my work. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and I'm just at that's perfect, because I'm just at the end of the book. So thank you, everybody, for your attention and for your interest in this. And I'm really happy to answer questions, hear comments.